Hey everyone, ready for another deep dive? Today, we're taking on the future of nuclear power.
Future, huh? Not just the same old stuff.
Nope, we're going way beyond. Think fusion power, and even this wild new concept called the Dual Fluid Reactor.
Sounds ambitious. What are we looking at today?
Got a research paper from the International Atomic Energy Agency all about the state of fusion research. Also, a Science magazine article on that dual fluid reactor. Sounds pretty groundbreaking.
Gotta love Science magazine. Anything else?
And a report by the World Nuclear Association. They cover the latest advancements in small modular reactors.
All right, so where do we start? Seems like a lot of ground to cover.
Well, let's kick things off with what we know. Nuclear fission. Splitting atoms, good old energy creation, still powers about 10% of the world's electricity. Pretty significant.
Yeah, it's reliable, always there when you need it, but it's not without its issues, right?
Definitely the radioactive waste, for one, needs to be stored safely for, thousands of years.
A long-term commitment for sure. And then, of course, there's the memory of those big accidents, Chernobyl, Fukushima.
Yeah. Those events definitely shook things up. Understandably, people get concerned about safety.
Rightfully so. But the thing is, technology keeps moving. Scientists and engineers, they're working on solutions. That's where Generation 4V reactors come into play.
Generation 4V reactors, those sound pretty high-tech.
They aim to be safer, way more efficient, and produce less waste. Take molten salt reactors, for example. They dissolve the nuclear fuel. No more solid fuel rods.
So no more risk of meltdown.
The design makes it inherently safer. The fuel expands when it heats up, naturally slowing down the reaction.
Wow, that's pretty clever. A built-in safety mechanism. What else?
Well, since molten salt reactors work at higher temperatures, they're way more efficient at converting that heat into electricity. And then you have fast breeder reactors. They actually produce more fuel than they consume.
Wait, more fuel? How's that even possible?
It's almost like alchemy. They use a special type of uranium, plutonium-239. Bred from uranium-238.
So they make their own fuel as they go. Are these Generation 4 reactors just concepts, or are people actually building them?
Oh, they're more than concepts. Several countries are heavily invested. China, Russia, the U.S. Some are already in the demo phase. Could be online in the next couple of decades.
So fission is definitely getting a makeover. But let's move on to the really exciting stuff, fusion. The power of the stars. Instead of splitting atoms, fusion smashes them together, and that releases a ton of energy.
Fusion has always been the dream, right? And for good reason. The fuel is abundant, deuterium and tritium. We can get deuterium right from seawater.
Hold on, seawater. That's amazing. And what about the waste? As bad as fission?
Not even close. Fusion produces way less radioactive waste, and it decays way faster.
Okay, so it's clean, the fuel is basically limitless. This sounds too good to be true. What's the catch?
The catch? It takes some serious heat and pressure to make it work. Think like the core of the sun.
Okay, so not exactly easy to replicate here on Earth. How hot are we talking?
Over 100 million degrees Celsius. 10 times hotter than the sun's core.
100 million degrees? Seriously, how do scientists even begin to create that kind of heat?
It takes some incredible technology. Most commonly, they use a device called a tokamak. Imagine a giant magnetic donut.
A magnetic donut. Okay, I'm listening.
It uses crazy strong magnetic fields to contain a superheated plasma. It's so hot that the atoms lose their electrons. Then you squeeze and heat that plasma to try to hit those fusion conditions.
So we're basically trying to create a tiny star on Earth. And who's leading this charge?
Well, there's this massive international effort called ITER, the International Thermonuclear Experimental Reactor. It's under construction in France right now.
Wow, this sounds huge. How many countries are involved?
35 countries are contributing. It's a real testament to how important this is.
It really shows how much is riding on finding that sustainable energy solution.
Exactly. And it's not just governments either.
You mean private companies are getting in on the action?
Yep. There are more and more private companies developing their own approaches to fusion, like Helion Energy, Commonwealth Fusion Systems.
Wow, it's like the space race all over again. Public and private, everyone's pushing boundaries. So we've got fission evolving, fusion on the horizon, and then there's this dual fluid reactor we mentioned. What's the deal with that? What makes it so different?
It's a whole new approach. Imagine two separate liquid circuits, one for the fuel, one for the coolant, both liquid.
Interesting. How does that change things?
Well, for one, the DFR can run much hotter than traditional reactors. We're talking crazy efficient at turning heat into electricity.
More bang for your buck, energy-wise. What about the radioactive waste? Does it solve that too?
It does. It constantly reprocesses the fuel, removing those long-lived radioactive byproducts.
So the waste decays much faster. That's a game changer. What kind of fuel does it even use?
That's the other amazing thing. It's super flexible. Thorium, uranium even. Get
Yeah.
this, existing nuclear waste.
It can use up old nuclear waste. Now, that's what I call closing the loop. If it works, like they say, it's a revolution for the nuclear industry.
It definitely has that potential. But it's early days yet. Lots of research and development still to be done.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground already. Fission evolving, fusion tantalizing us, and then this DFR coming out of left field. The future of nuclear is looking anything but boring. Anything else to add about these technologies before we move on?
I think it's important to remember this is just a glimpse. There's so much more happening in the world of nuclear energy. Small modular reactors, hybrid fusion fission, it's all incredibly exciting. It really is amazing to see all this progress happening so fast.
It is, but all this cutting-edge tech, it's got to come with a hefty price tag. What are we talking about here? Billions? Trillions?
Yeah, you're not wrong to think big numbers. Developing and deploying these advanced technologies, it takes a major upfront investment. Take ITER, for example. Estimated cost, over 20 billion euros, and that's just to get it up and running.
20 billion euros. That's more than some countries' entire economies. Who's paying for all of this?
It's a mix, government funding and private investment. For the big international projects like ITER, it's mostly governments pooling resources. But we're also seeing a lot of private companies jumping into the game, especially with fusion and those SMRs. Venture capital, even individual investors, they're betting on the future of clean energy.
So it's a bit of a high-stakes race then, public and private, all vying for the future of energy. But with nuclear, there's always that safety question hanging in the air. Accidents happen. People remember Chernobyl, Fukushima.
You're right. Those concerns are totally understandable. We can't just ignore the past. Those images, the stories, they stick with you.
They do. So how do we move past that? How do we show people that these new technologies are different, safer?
I think transparency is key. We need to be upfront about the risks, not try to hide them.
Yeah.
But we also have to highlight the potential benefits.
Like with the DFR, essentially recycling nuclear waste, turning a problem into a solution. And fusion doesn't produce that long-lived radioactive waste either.
Exactly. We need to make sure people understand how these technologies are different, designed with safety and sustainability at their core.
Safety's a big one, but there's also that worry about proliferation, the risk of these technologies being used for weapons.
Yeah, it's a valid concern.
Yeah.
That's where international safeguards and regulations come in. Got to make sure these technologies are only used for good, to benefit everyone, not to cause harm.
So something like a global watchdog for advanced nuclear, making sure things stay on track.
Something like that, yeah. We need strong oversight, monitoring to prevent any misuse. Think of it like a supercharged version of the International Atomic Energy Agency, but specifically focused on these new advancements. They would set the standards, do inspections, make sure everyone's playing by the rules.
Right, so we've got the cost, public perception, proliferation.
Yeah.
All big hurdles. Anything else we're facing in getting to this clean energy future?
Regulations are another big one. We need clear guidelines for developing, testing, deploying these new technologies. Everything from safety standards to waste disposal needs to be carefully thought out.
So no building a fusion reactor in the backyard just yet?
Afraid not. This stuff is complex, potentially risky. We need to make sure it's done right to protect people and the environment.
Of course, safety first. But who sets these rules? Is it a national thing or more international?
It's a bit of both. Each country will have its own rules, but there needs to be international cooperation, too, to make sure things are consistent. We don't want a bunch of conflicting rules that would just slow things down.
Sounds like a bureaucratic nightmare waiting to happen. But I get it. We need a unified approach.
So we've talked about the challenges, but let's go back to that vision of the future, powered by fusion and the DFR. How realistic is it? Are we talking decades, centuries, or could this happen in our lifetime? That's the million-dollar question. Honestly, it's tough to say for sure. So many moving parts, so much we don't know yet. But what I can say is that innovation is happening really fast. What seemed like sci-fi a few decades ago is starting to feel possible.
So it's not just wishful thinking. There's real progress being made.
Oh, absolutely. Just look at fusion research. Major breakthroughs in recent years, experiments hitting higher temperatures, keeping that plasma stable for longer. We're getting closer to that ignition point where fusion becomes self-sustaining.
That's pretty exciting. So there's reason to be optimistic then. Maybe we really will see this clean energy future.
I believe we can, but it's going to take everyone working together. Governments, scientists, engineers, even the public. We all need to be on board.
Okay, I'm sold. But let's bring it back down to earth for a second. We've been talking big picture, but are there any examples of how this tech is being used right now?
Well, on the fission side, small modular reactors, SMRs, they're starting to gain traction, being used in remote areas as backup power for hospitals, critical infrastructure.
So like little mini power plants that can go anywhere. Pretty cool.
Exactly. And because they're smaller, they're potentially cheaper and faster to build than those huge traditional reactors. Plus, they're designed with better safety features, easier to integrate into existing power grids.
That's fascinating. What about fusion? Any real-world uses yet, even if it's not power generation?
Not for generating electricity on a large scale, not yet. But fusion tech is being used in other areas: medical imaging, material science. For example, fusion-based neutron sources, they help study the structure of materials, leading to breakthroughs in all sorts of fields.
So it's not just about energy then. There are spin-off benefits that are already making a difference. That's amazing. So we're seeing innovation, collaboration, tons of potential, but we also have to be realistic. Things might not always go as planned, right?
That's right. We can't just assume it'll be smooth sailing. There will be setbacks, unexpected problems, probably a few surprises along the way. That's how exploration and development work.
So it's an adventure with twists and turns and no guaranteed happy ending.
Exactly. And like any great adventure, the journey matters as much as the destination. The lessons learned, the things we create, the challenges overcome, they're all part of the story.
I love that. So, dear listener, as we wrap up the second act of our nuclear odyssey, we want you to think about this. What role can you play in shaping this clean energy future? It's not just up to the scientists and engineers, it's about all of us. Making informed choices, supporting sustainable technologies, we're all in this together. You know, we've been pretty gung-ho about all this nuclear innovation, but I bet not everyone's as excited.
Yeah, that's fair. There are definitely some people who are, well, a little more hesitant.
Yeah, they might say nuclear is just too risky, too expensive. Why bother when we've got renewables like solar and wind?
Right. Some people look at the history with nuclear accidents, the waste disposal issue, and they're understandably cautious.
And you can see their point, right?
Yeah.
Why not just go all in on solar and wind? They're already making a difference.
True, but it's important to remember no single energy source is a magic bullet. Renewables have their limitations too. Yeah. Well, think about it. Solar and wind, they're intermittent. They depend on the weather.
Right. The sun's not always shining, the wind's not always blowing, so we can't rely on them 24/7. Is that where nuclear steps in?
Exactly. Nuclear can provide that constant baseload power. No matter what the weather's doing, it's always on, ready to go.
So it's not about picking one or the other. It's about having a mix, the best of all worlds.
Exactly. A balanced energy portfolio. We need all the tools in the toolbox.
Makes sense. And as we've been talking about these new technologies, fusion, DFR, they could solve a lot of those old nuclear problems. But all this innovation, it doesn't just happen on its own. What role does government policy play?
Governments are crucial. They set the stage. They can fund research, offer incentives for private investment, streamline regulations, so it's easier to get these technologies up and running.
So it's about creating the right environment. Like a gardener, making sure the soil's good, the plants get enough water and sun.
Perfect analogy.
Yeah.
And it's not just about throwing money around. It's about smart investment, bringing together universities, industry, government agencies.
A whole ecosystem working together. What about us regular folks? What can we do to support this clean energy future?
Plenty. First off, get informed. Learn about the different energy options. What are the trade-offs? Support policies that encourage clean energy development. Make sustainable choices in your own life.
Like using energy-efficient appliances, pushing for more renewables in our community.
Exactly. Every little bit helps.
Yeah.
And when we all act together, it can really make a difference.
It's empowering to know we're not just bystanders. We can actually shape the future. But before we get too carried away, we have to acknowledge the risks. There are no guarantees, right?
Absolutely. We need to stay grounded. Be prepared for setbacks. It's a complex process, and things won't always go perfectly.
So maybe it's not a sprint to the finish line, more like a marathon. Or one of those ultra marathons you mentioned, with unpredictable terrain.
A great analogy. We're in it for the long haul. But even with the bumps in the road, I truly believe it's worth it. A world powered by clean, safe, abundant energy. That's a goal worth fighting for.
I couldn't agree more. It's been an amazing journey exploring this world of nuclear innovation. So much creativity, collaboration, and this drive to create a better future. As we wrap up this deep dive into the future of nuclear energy, we want to leave you with this thought. The future isn't set in stone. It's something we create together. through our choices, our actions, our belief in the power of innovation. Thanks for joining us on this electrifying adventure.